Hospitals are supposed to be safe havens. When you are injured, sick, or dying, the emergency room is the one place on earth where highly trained professionals are standing by, ready to pull you back from the brink of death. You expect the doctors to save you. You never expect that the patient lying on the stretcher next to you is about to turn the entire hospital into a deadly, toxic hazard zone. What you are about to hear is widely considered the most terrifying and baffling medical mystery in the history of the United States. It sounds like the plot of a science fiction horror movie, but it is entirely real. It is fully documented by the medical staff who survived it, the hazardous materials teams who investigated it, and the scientists who tried to understand it. It is the story of a woman who was rushed to the hospital to be saved, but whose own body mysteriously transformed into a lethal chemical weapon. This is the true story of Gloria Ramirez, forever known in the medical world as the Toxic Lady. Our story takes place on the evening of February 19th. The location is the emergency room of Riverside General Hospital in Southern California. It was a relatively normal, busy Saturday night in the ER. Doctors and nurses were moving from bed to bed, treating the usual weekend cases. The bright fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and the smell of sterile alcohol hung in the air. At exactly 8:15 p.m., the double doors of the emergency room burst open. Paramedics rushed in, pushing a gurney holding a 31-year-old woman named Gloria Ramirez. Gloria was in critical condition. She was suffering from late-stage cervical cancer, and her body was shutting down. She was experiencing massive cardiac distress. Her heart was beating wildly out of control. Her blood pressure was dropping fast, and she was struggling to take even a single breath. She was conscious, but she was terrified and confused. A trauma team of highly experienced medical professionals immediately surrounded her bed. This was a code blue situation. Every second mattered. The team included Dr. Mark Gerczynski, Dr. Julie Gerczynski, respiratory therapist Maureen Welch, and a registered nurse named Susan Kane. These were veterans of the emergency room. They had seen it all: gunshot wounds, horrific accidents, massive heart attacks. They were calm, focused, and ready to work. They immediately began to administer life-saving drugs to Gloria. They gave her Valium, Versed, and Ativan to try and calm her erratic heart rate. But the drugs had absolutely no effect. Gloria's condition was deteriorating by the second. The medical team realized they needed to shock her heart back into a normal rhythm. They ripped open her shirt to attach the defibrillator pads to her chest. And that is when the first bizarre anomaly occurred. As the doctors exposed Gloria's chest, they noticed that her skin was covered in a strange, oily sheen. It wasn't sweat, it was a thick, slick residue that coated her entire upper body. It looked and felt completely unnatural, but there was no time to investigate. Gloria's life was slipping away. They applied the defibrillator pads and shocked her. Clear. Thump. Nothing changed. At the exact same time, Susan Kane, the registered nurse, leaned over Gloria to draw a blood sample from her arm. They needed to run a blood gas test to see what was happening inside her body. Susan inserted the needle into Gloria's arm and drew the blood into the syringe. But the moment the blood filled the plastic tube, a strange, overpowering odor hit Susan directly in the face. It was a harsh chemical smell. Some described it as smelling like heavily concentrated garlic, while others said it smelled exactly like ammonia. Susan was confused. She pulled the syringe away and handed it to Maureen Welch, the respiratory therapist, standing next to her. Susan asked her, "Do you smell that?" Maureen brought the syringe close to her face and sniffed. She immediately pulled back. The smell of ammonia was so strong, it burned her nostrils. Maureen then handed the syringe of blood to Dr. Julie Gersinski. Dr. Gersinski took the syringe, and as she looked at it under the bright fluorescent light of the trauma room, she saw something that made her blood run cold. The blood inside the syringe was wrong. Human blood is supposed to be a smooth, dark red liquid, but floating inside Gloria's blood were strange, manila-colored, crystal-like particles. They looked like tiny pieces of shattered glass drifting inside the red fluid. Dr. Gersinski had never seen anything like this in her entire medical career. Blood does not crystallize inside a living human body. It is biologically impossible. Before the doctor could even ask a question, the nightmare truly began. Susan Kane, the nurse who had drawn the blood, suddenly complained that her face was burning. She took 2 steps backward. Her eyes rolled into the back of her head, and she suddenly fell to the floor of the emergency room, completely losing consciousness. The medical team was stunned. They immediately rushed to help their fallen colleague, moving her out of the room. Dr. Julie Gersinski stepped out into the hallway to assist. But as she stood there, she suddenly felt a wave of severe dizziness wash over her. The room began to spin, and she experienced a sudden, extreme shortness of breath. Dr. Gersinski slumped down, requiring immediate emergency assistance as her breathing became heavily compromised. In a matter of minutes, 2 experienced medical professionals were completely incapacitated just from being in the same room as the patient, Gloria Ramirez. A sense of urgent alarm began to spread. Maureen Welch, a respiratory therapist who had been near the patient's bed, suddenly experienced blurred vision and extreme chest pressure. Her legs gave out and she collapsed. A 4th person, Nurse Sally Balderas, entered the room, took 1 breath of the air, felt an immediate, severe reaction in her throat, and fainted in the hallway. Whatever was happening, it was spreading fast. The environment inside the emergency room had somehow become compromised. There was no visible leak, Yet the presence of the 31-year-old patient seemed to be the center of the mystery. The ER director made a split-second, unprecedented decision. He ordered an immediate, orderly evacuation of the entire emergency department. Dozens of patients were safely relocated outside into the cold February night, turning the parking lot into a makeshift care center. Inside, a small crew of brave staff volunteered to stay behind, wearing masks, trying to save Gloria. Despite their heroic efforts, there was nothing they could do. At 8:50 p.m., Gloria Ramirez passed away. Her room was immediately sealed. The aftermath was like a scene from a science fiction film. A highly specialized hazardous materials team, dressed in heavy, full-body hazmat suits, marched into the evacuated emergency room. They carried advanced chemical detection equipment and air sampling devices, sweeping every inch of the room. After hours of tense searching, the hazmat team delivered a baffling report. They found absolutely nothing. No gas leak, no chemical spill, no radiation. The air was perfectly clean. Yet, the impact was undeniable. That night, 23 hospital workers became severely unwell, with 5 requiring critical hospitalization. Dr. Julie Gerchinsky faced a long recovery in the ICU, dealing with complex organ complications and severe mobility issues. What could cause such a profound reaction in a room full of healthy doctors, yet leave no trace behind for a hazmat team to find? The mystery triggered one of the largest scientific investigations in medical history. Even the post-mortem examination required pathologists to wear full hazmat suits in a specially constructed containment room. But the initial findings provided no explanation for the strange fumes or the unusual crystals found in her samples, forcing the state to bring in independent scientists to solve the impossible case. After interviewing the medical staff, these scientists released a report that infuriated the victims and shocked the nation. They concluded that the entire event was a case of, and quote, mass sociogenic illness, end quote. In plain English, they claimed it was mass hysteria. They suggested that Susan Kane, the first nurse to faint, had simply suffered a panic attack after smelling something weird. When the others saw her faint, their brains tricked them into feeling sick, causing a domino effect of panic and fainting. The medical staff at Riverside General were absolutely outraged. Dr. Julie Gerchinsky, sitting in a wheelchair with dying bones in her knees, publicly slammed the report. Mass hysteria does not cause a doctor to stop breathing. It does not cause a person's liver to fail. It does not kill the bones in your legs. They demanded a real, scientific answer. Finally, the investigation was handed over to the forensic scientists at the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. This is one of the most advanced scientific research facilities in the world. A place where the government designs nuclear weapons and studies deadly pathogens. If anyone could solve the mystery of the toxic lady, it was them. The scientists at Livermore looked at the three most bizarre clues of the case: the oily sheen on Gloria's skin, the garlic and ammonia smell, and the mysterious white crystals floating in her blood. After months of intense chemical analysis and recreating the events of that night in a controlled laboratory, the scientists proposed a theory. It is a theory that involves a chain reaction of chemical events so perfectly tragic and rare that it has never been recorded in medical history before or since. Here is the terrifying scientific explanation of what they believe happened. Gloria Ramirez was dying of terminal cervical cancer. She was in constant, agonizing pain. To manage this pain, many people turned to alternative, over-the-counter remedies. One very popular home remedy in the 1990s was a sports cream called dimethyl sulfokide, or DMSO for short. Athletes used it to relieve muscle aches. DMSO comes in the form of a thick, oily gel. When you rub it on your skin, it absorbs very quickly. And one of the known side effects of using DMSO is that it leaves a distinct garlic-like taste in your mouth and a garlic smell on your breath. This perfectly explained the strange, oily sheen the doctors found on Gloria's chest and the garlic odor they smelled. But DMSO is not toxic. It cannot hurt you. So, how did it become deadly? This is where the chain reaction begins. When a person absorbs a massive amount of DMSO into their body, the chemical enters their bloodstream. Gloria had been using huge amounts of it to fight her severe cancer pain. Her blood was saturated with it. When she was brought into the emergency room, she was struggling to breathe. The very first thing the paramedics did was put an oxygen mask on her face, pumping massive amounts of pure oxygen into her lungs and blood. According to the Livermore scientists, when the pure oxygen mixed with the DMSO in her blood, it caused a chemical reaction. It added an oxygen atom to the molecule, changing the dimethyl sulfoside into a new chemical called dimethyl sulfone, or DMSO2. DMSO2 is also relatively harmless. However, it has one very unique physical property. It crystallizes at room temperature. When the nurse drew Gloria's blood, the blood moved from the warm environment of her body into the much cooler air of the emergency room. As the blood cooled inside the plastic syringe, the DMSO2 instantly crystallized. This perfectly explained the bizarre, manila-colored, glass-like particles that Dr. Gerchinsky saw floating in the blood. But DMSO2 is still not a toxic gas. The final, deadly transformation was yet to come. Remember what the doctors did just seconds before they drew the blood. Gloria's heart was failing. They placed defibrillator pads on her chest and hit her with a massive shock of high-voltage electricity. The Livermore scientists theorized that the electric shock from the defibrillator provided exactly the right amount of energy needed to force another chemical reaction. It rearranged the atoms in Gloria's blood one final time. It converted the dimethyl sulfone into a chemical called dimethyl sulfate. Dimethyl sulfate is not a sports cream. It is not a harmless chemical. Dimethyl sulfate is a highly toxic, incredibly lethal chemical compound. It is so dangerous that it is strictly regulated as a chemical weapon. In fact, it was used as a deadly nerve gas during military conflicts. When inhaled, dimethyl sulfate vapors cause immediate burning of the eyes and respiratory tract. It causes severe convulsions, paralysis, delirium, coma, and massive internal organ damage. It can literally cause human tissue and bone to die. And the vapor of dimethyl sulfate has a distinct smell. It smells exactly like ammonia. The puzzle was finally complete. Through a bizarre, tragic, one-in-a-billion sequence of events, a dying woman's desperate attempt to cure her pain had turned her bloodstream into a chemical factory. She used a pain cream. The paramedics gave her oxygen. The doctors gave her electricity. And the combination created a cloud of military-grade nerve gas that vented out of her mouth and the syringe, directly into the faces of the people trying to save her life. Because dimethyl sulfate is a heavy gas, it dissipates very quickly in open air, which perfectly explains why the Hazmat team found absolutely zero trace of it just hours later. It had simply evaporated into the ventilation system. The Lawrence Livermore report remains the most widely accepted scientific explanation for what happened to Gloria Ramirez. However, to this day, it is technically just a theory. The actual chemical, dimethyl sulfate, was never officially found in her body. Likely because it had already evaporated or broken down by the time the delayed autopsies were performed. Some independent scientists still debate the theory, arguing that it is too unbelievable, too perfect of a chemical storm. But they have never been able to offer a better explanation. Gloria Ramirez was buried in an unmarked grave at Olivewood Cemetery in Riverside. Her family was devastated, not only by her death, but by the fact that she was remembered not as a loving mother of two, but as a toxic anomaly. The story of the toxic lady leaves us with a terrifying realization about the human body. We think of ourselves as fragile, biological machines, made of flesh and blood. But underneath our skin, we are walking chemistry sets. Millions of chemical reactions are happening inside you right now, keeping you alive. But all it takes is the wrong combination of elements, a little bit of oxygen and a spark of electricity, to turn the very blood in your veins into something deadly. If you were a doctor working in that emergency room, and the person you were trying to save suddenly started poisoning the air you breathe, what would you do? Do you run to save yourself, or do you stay and risk your own life for theirs? Let me know in the comments below. And if this true medical mystery kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you